On the heels of a terrible spin-off show, a bad second season, rumors of a writer's room that hates the source material, and the announcement that this would be Henry Cavill's last season as Geralt of Rivia, I was honestly dreading watching The Witcher Season 3. I just didn't see a world where the show would overcome all of the turmoil surrounding it to produce a quality season of television. And maybe it's because my expectations for Season 3 were at an all-time low that I ended up not hating it. I don't think it's great or even particularly good. I would probably describe it as fine, I guess. Like, it's mostly just meh. It does have a fair amount of issues, but next to the god-awful mess that was Blood Origin, and even the nonsensical Season 2, it ends up looking better by comparison. It should also be noted that other than the Netflix adaptation and spin-off, my only other previous experience with the Witcher series was reading the first book. If I was more familiar with the source material, it's likely I would have enjoyed the season even less, but I can only watch the show from my own perspective. With that said, in this video, I will be taking an in-depth look at The Witcher Season 3 Part 1, highlighting the positives and negatives of the show. Spoilers ahead.
Master Rience will recompense you handsomely for illumination as to their whereabouts.
The first scene of the season did nothing to assuage my concerns, as it opens on a Poindexter dropping some cringe, overly stylized dialogue.
Her with ashen hair and patrician countenance? Him a mannerless, blanched brute?
Like, I get that he's supposed to be an intellectual and his speech patterns are meant to reflect that, but considering that he's dead by the end of this scene, was it really necessary to give this character his own little quirk? Fortunately, this is a bit of an outlier and not fully reflective of the quality of the season's dialogue. The dialogue throughout the season is a little heavy-handed at times, but it never reaches the same level of cringe that this scene does. I also didn't really care for how the scene ends, as after stumbling upon Geralt just chillin', we get a first-person POV of Geralt chopping off Poindexter's head. For whatever reason, the visual of this moment just seemed a little off to me. The first scene of the season seemingly validated my worst fears. Things don't get better immediately following this, as we then get narration from Yennefer in the guise of a letter. It makes sense that after last season, where Yennefer tried to lead Ciri to her death, she and Geralt would not be on speaking terms. But I just find using the letter as a narration device in this instance to be a bit of a lazy way for the show to try and explain what happened between seasons, and to try and win the audience back to Yennefer's side. She also gives a shout out to Dom Toretto and the crew,
fast and furiously,
in one of her letters. We find out that the trio of Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri have been on the run, as everyone is now looking to capture Ciri to use her for their own purposes. Yen is along for the ride so that she can teach Ciri to control her chaos magic, mastering each of the 4 elements so that she can become the Avatar.
Water magic is tricky.
That's what you said about earth magic and air magic.
How could fire magic be any worse?
They are on a bonding speed run, as they need to establish a motherly relationship with Yen and Ciri, in spite of Yen trying to kill Ciri in the previous season. And this is where we run into one of the season's biggest issues. To be able to enjoy Season 3 in any real capacity, the viewer has to kind of forget about what happened in Season 2, specifically with Yennefer. Yennefer's storyline was one of the worst aspects of Season 2, and its events should have major repercussions for Season 3. Yen trying to sacrifice Ciri in order to gain her magic back is like a massive dark cloud that hangs over her character and her relationships with Geralt and Ciri. I find it hard to believe that Geralt could ever really trust Yen again, as protecting Ciri has become his reason for living. And it feels like it should also be a pretty big hurdle for Yen and Ciri to overcome if they are to have a mother-daughter-like bond. The show tries to lampshade these issues in an attempt to get the audiences back on board.
Amazing what people will do when you give them a second chance.
I don't really think it works. Also of note is that in Season 2, while under suspicion of being a Nilfgaardian spy, Yennefer freed Cahir and betrayed the Brotherhood. The repercussions for these actions are almost non-existent in Season 3, as she is able to waltz back into the Brotherhood pretty easily and organize a conclave on their behalf.
You're going back to Aretusa after that legendary night of non-fatal execution.
Well, I'm hoping they've forgotten about that.
When teaching Ciri about fire magic, Yennefer states,
It takes something you never get back. Your magic.
and I think that is a pretty apt metaphor for Yen facing the consequences of her actions as she gets her magic back at the end of the second season, showing that the rules don't really apply to her character. I really think to get any enjoyment out of the season, the audience is forced to ignore a ton of elements from season 2, which in itself is a massive flaw of the show. I can definitely understand how some people are simply unable to get invested in the season because of the show's previous failings undermining the story that they are trying to tell. As they are on the run, it would make sense for the trio to disguise themselves a bit, as they are very distinctive looking people. But they don't. The show lampshades this as well.
You really want to hide, you die that mop?
It's also mentioned by Geralt when he is talking about Ciri's Beltane festival look.
I think you need to hide your hair and mask your eyes.
After he mentioned those great points, I thought Ciri was going to take his advice, only for us to cut to the festival and see Ciri in the same getup that she was just in, half-heartedly holding a mask to cover her face that she barely ends up using. Are they trying to be found? Wasn't the whole point of going to the festival that it would be safe because everyone would be dressed up and wearing masks? Not surprisingly, they are found out at the party and have to fend off a beast. As they try and figure out how they were found, they come up with a plan to hunt their hunter. The plan is a little convoluted for my taste, as they have Yarpen talk loudly about escorting Ciri at a bar that the people they want to overhear it just so happen to be at. I get that Geralt says that based on the beast, it could only be one guy, but the fact that it seems like Yarpen is yapping at the local pub makes the world feel small and like Rience and his goons were just down the road from Geralt and company. As they set their trap, we get one of our first good moments, after hearing about a massacre of elves following the conjunction. We get a glimpse into Geralt and his appreciation for neutrality, noting that the elves that tried to rally against the humans died nobly, but by doing so, they condemned the rest of their race to turmoil. The leader being remembered and getting a statue, but losing what actually mattered in the process. This story also gives some development to Ciri, as she feels like her unique heritage could help her bring peace to the world through mutual understanding. Her resolve is strong, and I imagine this is something that will be built on in the future. When the fight starts, it is actually very enjoyable, despite some contrivances in its setup, like how the elves just kind of show up out of nowhere. We have almost no context to how they knew where to be, unless I missed a scene. The fight itself is actually fun though, as we get to see Yen bust out some magic moves, Ciri showcase her Witcher training, and Geralt go all out. The highlight of the entire sequence is a one-shot of Geralt cutting his way through the battlefield. It feels dynamic and really puts the audience in the action.
It is a one-take fight. There are no cuts in here. There's no cheat cuts either. The beauty of a one-take is that it can allow the audience members to feel truly involved in the dance of death that is happening.
There are, however, two moments that detract from the great choreography and camera work of the fight. The first is more funny dumb, as Francesca's brother catches Ciri, and instead of doing anything remotely intelligent, he grabs her wrist and starts shouting that he got her.
I got her! I got her!
It's really dumb, but also unintentionally hilarious as he jumps around like a 5-year-old trying to impress his mom, right before he gets murdered. The second issue is much larger, as its stupidity has actual repercussions for the season. After breaking Rience's hands and having him dead to rights, Geralt just leaves him alive. Why doesn't he kill him? Especially because in like the next scene, the party splits up because Geralt says he has to go and kill Rience.
I need to find Rience to finish him off.
It's honestly pretty bad and takes the audience out of the show.
Yeah, I'm aware this doesn't make a lot of sense.
This dumb decision forces the band to break up, something that I was against just because I wanted to see the characters interact with each other a little bit more. I wish there was more time to build up a family dynamic between the three, and I would have liked them to stick together a little bit longer.
I'm not Geralt. This isn't Kaer Morhen. This is the version of myself I have to be here. So you need to find the version of yourself that can deal with that.
Trust me, I know you're not Geralt. He would never sell his soul like this.
As the squad splits, we end up following them on their own subplots. The Ciri end of things sees the pair heading to Aretuza because it is the safest place for Ciri. We see the pair traveling as Yen sends Aretuza her best apology letter so that they will let her back in to the club. I mentioned earlier how you almost have to ignore Yennefer Season 2 actions to believe that the Brotherhood would welcome her back, but I think it works without ignoring in one instance, and that is in the case of Tissaia. Tissaia is shown to immensely care for Yennefer as if she were her own daughter. I feel like her being willing to forgive what is essentially her child, even if it's not the best thing for her to do, makes sense from a character perspective. When the two meet up, Tissaia agrees to Yennefer's plans and to help train Ciri. During the convo though, she calls Yen a mother.
After all your searching, you actually did it. Became a mother.
and I'm just like, whoa, you might want to slow your roll on that one. Feels way too early, at least for me, to see Yen as a maternal figure to Ciri. It feels like the show trying to convince the audience. Yennefer's apology tour seemed to go pretty well, as when she is pitching her ideas to the Brotherhood, she preemptively thanks them for their forgiveness, even though she hasn't even been forgiven yet.
I find that if you keep acting like something you want's gonna happen, a lot of times it just does.
The idea that she is proposing to the Brotherhood is to summon a conclave as a means of promoting trust and togetherness, which sounds basic and generic as hell. What does that even mean? What are you specifically going to do to achieve that goal? The idea of trust and togetherness is good and all, but we are given no idea about how Yen means to achieve this. It feels like little more than vague buzzwords. Even though Yen's return to Aretuza is seemingly going swimmingly, her relationship with Ciri has hit a bit of a snag. Turns out, Ciri is not really liking Aretuza all that much, seeing many of the mages as spoiled narcissistic gossips. One mage in particular is annoying as she doesn't fully say what she means and then gets annoyed when Ciri doesn't do exactly as she wants.
Here, girl. I told you to bring the wine. I wanted red. Oh, the wine. No.
I'm with Ciri on this one. Ciri has a fight with Yen where she calls her fake and then dips. The sequence that follows is really weird and disconnected. After Ciri leaves, it feels like a harsh jump as we then see her on a horse riding away as she is being chased by the Wild Hunt. It feels like it came out of nowhere, and it's made even weirder as when we check back in later with Yennefer, she is completely unconcerned with Ciri running away. She tells Triss that Geralt is bringing Ciri, but how does Yen know where Ciri even is, let alone that she's with Geralt? This feels really sloppy and adds a disjointedness to the storyline. The actual scene of Ciri running away from the Wild Hunt also looked pretty whack, as it looks like bad green screen and CGI. There was a scene a little earlier on that I think was pretty obviously a green screen, so that is also not the best. I also just wanted to make note here that some of the makeup decisions the show made are a little bit distracting at times, specifically in the case of Ciri's eyelashes being covered in mascara in the middle of the woods, and all of the mages having perfectly modern manicures. I just found these elements to be a bit distracting at times.
We stay the course.
Neutrality has consequences too, Geralt.
There are already consequences, Jaskier. And not just for Ciri.
I find the Geralt Jaskier side of things to be more entertaining than the Yen Ciri side, mostly because it doesn't have the baggage that comes from Season 2. Geralt and Jaskier are two of the most enjoyable and well-realized characters on the show, at least for me, so watching them share a storyline puts me immediately in their corner. I will say though that they had me worried early, as they made me think that they might have Jaskier pull a Yen from last season and betray Geralt by abducting Ciri. As it turns out, when Jaskier was helping the elves in Season 2, he was being backed by Redania, and more specifically, Dijkstra and Philippa. And in this season, the bill comes due, as Jaskier is approached early on, telling him to turn Ciri over to Redania. Luckily, the bard doesn't go rogue, and instead he stays true to himself and his friends. Jaskier and Geralt eventually talk about Redania trying to pull Jaskier's strings. What I like is that even though Jaskier thinks Ciri should go to Redania, ultimately he knows that it's not his decision to make. They have a conversation about it like two friends who trust each other. I also think Jaskier's reasoning for considering bringing Ciri to Redania makes sense, as in his mind it would stop the people he cares about from being hunted. He wants them to be safe, and theoretically, with the protection of the Redanian nobility, that's not too bad of an option. What Jaskier isn't seeing, and what Geralt is concerned with, is that ultimately, Redania's protection of Ciri would come at a cost, as she would become theirs to use however they pleased. I think Geralt has the right of it, but I appreciate the discussion between the two, who both have Ciri's best interests in mind, but have different ideas on how to achieve it. There's also a pretty great moment as Geralt learns of his mother's death, and opens up about his feelings for her. He felt abandoned by her, but more than anything, he was confused, not knowing why this was the decision that his mother made. It's not very often that we see Geralt this vulnerable, and as a result, this scene is a real treat. It's made better as near the end, he relates it back to his own position with Ciri, and this reinforces his resolve to not abandon her, the same way that he was abandoned. It's not all good over here though, as there are aspects that I don't particularly care for. The character of Radovid is portrayed as a well-meaning, goofy simpleton, but the show makes sure to tell us that there is more under the surface, and that he is smarter than he may seem. However, in one of his first scenes, he is used to spill out some meta commentary, claiming the Song of the Seven is his favorite song.
Song of the Seven's my favorite.
Yeah. Almost like he is telling the audience to go watch Blood Origin, cause it's really good. I honestly started disliking him after this line, even though I know it has very little to do with him as an actual character. My real issue with him is more so that I find the writing surrounding his character to be a little heavy-handed and clunky. They really want us to know that he is actually really smart and is putting on an act, but we are told this more than we actually see it.
Radovid has surprisingly good instincts.
The only instance we see of it is when he pretends to be drunk. I also don't fully buy his romance with Jaskier. I feel like if it was set up like they had the hots for each other, I could get on board because bard horniness conquers all. But where they're trying to set it up, like Jaskier has genuine feelings for Radovid, I'm having a harder time believing it. I also think the constant emphasis that Radovid is smarter than we think is leading to a big reveal where he was just playing Jaskier the whole time, as a means to fulfill his own nefarious purposes. I don't think this would really be a satisfying route for me, but we'll have to wait and see how it ends up playing out. I feel the need to mention one of the most bizarre moments of the season. When Geralt and Jaskier are going to gather some intel, in order to get their foot in the door, they have to bring a heart and toss it at the door so that a spike can pop out and skewer it. What the fuck was that about? Like, it is legitimately one of the most weird and confusing things about the show. On Geralt's hunt for the man he should have already killed, he comes across a creepy cave where someone has been performing experiments on young girls. It's some Cronenberg level shit, as a grotesque clump of fused human bodies attacks Geralt as the talking heads give the play-by-play. He manages to rescue one girl, who has had Ciri's memories implanted into her head. They give fake Ciri some healing juice, and go to cut some firewood to kill the time. Geralt ends up chopping a ton of wood, with Jaskier unwittingly enlisted as his assistant.
I don't know how I necessarily became the junior deputy firewood bitch.
After having a eureka moment, they return to the cabin and wake fake Ciri a little too early, as she is not able to give them the full details on who abducted her. Feels like a bit of a contrivance in the writing department, as if Geralt had just waited a little longer, she would have been able to answer all of their questions, but for whatever reason, Geralt needed to talk to her that very second. Also, possessed fake Ciri manages to somehow swipe the werewolf's anti-transformation amulet, even though she never was that close to him. We also don't actually see her do it, she just magically has it. Kinda dumb.
Emir asked you to join his search for Cirilla of Sintra.
There's not a whole lot to the Nilfgaard elf subplot, but it's definitely building up to something. It turns out there is some strife amongst the elves, as Francesca and her crew are looking to find Ciri, as they see her as their savior. However, not all elves think the same, as notably, newcomer Galantin thinks looking for the girl is a waste of time, and they are better served trying to protect what they have and to try and gain resources. Galantin is played by Robbie Amell, who I actually like as a comedic actor, but I think he is a little miscast in this role. Whenever he talks, he uses this whisper growl voice, trying to sound like a rugged war veteran.
While the rest of us are out there, following orders, attacking convoys, doing the work to get our land back.
It doesn't really work for me and is a bit distracting. Tired with following Francesca's orders, Galantin goes to find his old buddy Cahir, who has been punished for lying about killing a baby. The two plot to install Galantin as the leader of the elves, with the Emperor's backing. However, Emir has different plans, as he sees the elves search for Ciri as something that he can use to his advantage. He orders Cahir to kill Galantin as a means of reproving his loyalty. Because we only just met Galantin, and only shortly after were we told that him and Cahir were friends, Cahir's betrayal doesn't really leave much of an impact. We didn't get to see them interact very much, or really bond together. It would have been much more meaningful if he had been ordered to kill Fringilla, as we saw those two interact and try to work together for 2 seasons. I actually like Cahir as a character, and feel like he could have a really interesting journey. I feel like killing Galantin is one of the first steps in him maybe starting to question Emir.
We started off with someone that was really sedentary and really indoctrinated in a kind of world and walk through the world in that way, and it's so amazing to be able to just every now and then just to get shit a little bit further and reveal a little bit more.
Also, the visions he is having of Ciri are interesting, and I am actually excited to see where that goes. Fringilla is in this season, and I have no idea what they're doing with her character. She starts off imprisoned and drinking poison of some kind. What I don't understand is, how come she didn't use her magic to try and escape? She goes on this big speech about how she has all this powerful magic, but is there a reason that she's not able to use it in the moment? There could genuinely just be something I'm missing, but if not, it seems like the writers kind of forgot she can use magic. She does eventually hatch an escape plan, and it's goofy as hell. One of her drinking buddies dies, and she is told to put the body in a sack. But instead of doing that, she puts herself in the sack and the guards throw her down the hill like a sack of potatoes. What I want to know is, what did she do with the dead guy? Is the dead body just still chilling in the dungeon? Also, did the guards not notice that Fringilla just disappeared? She seems pretty distinct compared to the other prisoners. But yeah, this was another unintentionally funny moment.
There is much work to be done tomorrow, but Tissaia and I are optimistic about the future of the continent, based on what we've seen here tonight. To peace.
The party episode is pretty interesting, and once again sees the show playing around with non-linear storytelling like they did in Season 1. However, before diving into the episode itself, I want to talk a bit about some of the lead-up. Geralt, Ciri, and Jaskier arrive back at Aretuza and are greeted by Yennefer. Jaskier is put on babysitting duty, which gives us some fun interactions between him and Ciri. I enjoyed the scene where Jaskier and Ciri did impressions of Geralt and Yen, giving us a fun little playful moment. We get to see the two bond further when they are playing cards, and Jaskier tries to comfort Ciri in her insecurities.
You don't have to do that. You don't have to prove what you're going to be in the future. My two Warrens? I think you're pretty alright right now.
He is fun, Uncle Jaskier, and I really like their bond and the way that the two interact. I honestly think the show has done a better job developing the Ciri-Jaskier bond than they have the Ciri-Yen bond, which is both a compliment and an indictment. The 4th episode ends with the ball looming. We get little asides of all of the major players, each of them scheming and planning for the night ahead. I think this did a good job in building anticipation and got me excited for the next episode. I just really like the idea of all these different people entering the ball with their own motivations and plans, trying to get things to fall their way, as opposing forces are wrestling with them for their own desired outcome. When episode 5 opened with Geralt and Yen post-party, I was disappointed, incorrectly thinking that the show decided to skip the climax of part 1. It might seem silly to think this, but I honestly wouldn't put anything past this show. As for the episode itself, I think it is a really fun and interesting idea, with just okay execution. I really like the idea of exploring a massive gathering through different character point of views and timelines, but I feel like the way that they did it was a bit cheap, and a way to withhold information from the audience. Instead of seeing the same conversations multiple times with only half context, I think it would have been more compelling to follow one character's perspective the entire time, and each time we go back to the beginning of the night, we follow a different character. I think that this way you still withhold some information from the audience, but it feels a lot less arbitrary. I enjoyed the dance sequence as it allowed us to see a lot of different character interactions, the characters scheming with every second made available to them. There were some things I didn't like though. For instance, why did Tissaia's bracelet fall off? Was it because we needed a clue to find out that Vilgefortz was the true culprit? Oh, that's convenient. I feel like Vilgefortz secretly being the one they were looking for is a fun reveal, and does make some sense. It will be interesting to see his full motivations laid out in part 2, as well as the degree of Tissaia's involvement in what she actually knows. Also, I think it's worth noting that the song was a little on the nose.
Best of luck tomorrow with the conclave, Witcher.
It may seem like I spent the majority of this video criticizing the many flaws of The Witcher Season 3, Part 1, and that's because I did. But even though it is very much a flawed outing, I don't think it's terrible. Coming into the season, I was expecting it to be awful, which may have led me to viewing it more favorably when it was able to clear my admittedly low bar. But even still, I think there are some moments worthy of praise amidst the flaws. Part 1 was a pretty middling display, but it did have me leaving the show a bit more excited about The Witcher than when I started the season. That's a little bit sad, and speaks to the state of the show leading up to this release. But I suppose Netflix will take what they can get. I guess we'll have to wait for Part 2 to see if they're able to build some momentum, maintain the okay I guessness of Part 1, or see the show fall to even lower depths. If you somehow made it to the end of this video, I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. It really helps the channel. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.